So we've touched on the importance of education, not only for you personally, but specifically for Black children who are so often overlooked in the state system. Talk to us about sending your son to private school, because I know that there'll be people listening to this who want to hear what you have to say on it. And you're probably sick to the back teeth of it, and you write about it in the book, but just explain that to us.
The first thing to say is that for me, education had been a ladder. It was a ladder up from the position of working class West Indians of my parents' generation. And I've never forgotten that it was a way upwards and forwards. And I wanted that for all children, particularly Black children. And I did a lot of work around education. And one of the things I realised that it wasn't just working class children who have failed by the system. It wasn't just Black children who have failed by the system. It was Black boys in particular. And Black boys were more likely to be undervalued, and Black boys were more likely to be excluded. And I always remember there was a Director General of the Prison Service who said, on the day that you exclude a child from school, you might as well give them a date and time to turn up at prison. And I've never forgotten that. And I had only the one son, and I felt guilty about being an MP and not being there for him enough. And I was determined that he wouldn't go on that trajectory from school to prison. And I agonised about whether to send him to a state school or whether to send him to a private school. And I really agonised because I believe in the state system, but more to the point, I knew I'd be attacked for sending him to a private school. And I spoke to friends, I spoke to relatives, I spoke to him. In the end, it was his choice. But as I expected, I was rained with abuse for sending him into a private school. Some of those people were people that genuinely believed in the state system, but some of those people were people that just wanted an excuse to attack Diane Abbott.
He called in to a radio station, didn't he, to defend you?
One of the saddest things, there was all of this abuse and attacks and so on. But one of the saddest things was, there was one day I was in Parliament and he was at home with his nanny, and she was upstairs for some reason. He was downstairs and he was listening to the radio, and he heard a call-in show on LBC, and the subject was me. And everyone was ringing to attack me for sending him to a private school. And very sadly, he felt the need to ring up and defend me. And he was only 11, and they should never have let him on air. And I've always felt very sad and very guilty that my 11-year-old son felt the need to defend his mother.
I suppose it's so difficult, isn't it? Because as humans, we are multifaceted and complex and contradictory a lot of the time. And yet, as politicians, there's an expectation that you will live your political values. And I wonder where you land on that spectrum, because the way you explain it, I completely agree with everything that you've just said. But how much do you feel that as a flawed person who is also a politician, you should live those values?
I am a flawed person, but I didn't send my son to private school because I'm a flawed person. I sent my son to private school because, knowing what I knew about the way the state system dealt with Black boys, I felt I couldn't do anything else. Had I lived in another part of the country, perhaps, but Hackney and Black boys, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. In the end, your children have to come first.
And you still campaign for a world that exists where the state system is not a fast track to prison for black boys. And I suppose that's your fundamental argument, is that that's not mutually exclusive. You can still campaign for that and want that world to exist and be realistic about the world that we currently live in.
I remember the day that the story broke in the press, Harriet Harman called me. And Harriet and I are on different wings of the Labour Party, but I'd known her before I became an MP, because we were both young feminists working for an organisation which is now known as Liberty, but was then known as the National Council for Civil Liberties. So I'd known her since then, and she rang me that morning. She'd sent her son to a selective school and been criticised for that. And she rang me that morning and said, "Are you all right?" And she also said, "You mustn't stop campaigning around education, because if you don't do it, nobody will."
I hope you enjoyed that video. Be sure to check out the full episode of How to Fail wherever you get your podcasts. And also make sure you're following us on social media for all the latest updates.